In the quiet, rural expanse of Georgia, the Wyrick family's search for a home began. They were a young couple, just starting out, and their needs were simple. A place that was safe, peaceful, and affordable. A perfect environment to raise children without the constant worry of urban crime. After a full year of searching, Andy and Lisa Wyrick stumbled upon what seemed like the ideal property. A brick ranch with a generous yard. The previous occupants had simply left, abandoning it. It was a stroke of luck for the Wyricks, who envisioned it as the perfect spot to raise their daughter. Heidi, far from any trouble. They never questioned why the owners had left in such a hurry. Finding this house felt like their good fortune. For Andy, it was a dream realized. At just 21, he had achieved the milestone of owning his own home, a fact that filled him with pride. They moved in and immediately set about transforming the house into a warm and loving home for their family. The only perceived downside was the lack of other children in the neighborhood. But Heidi, an imaginative child, didn't seem to mind. She adored the spacious yard, which gave Lisa peace of mind. One late March afternoon, while Andy was at work, Heidi asked to play outside. Lisa, focused on her tasks, didn't think twice. A short time later, Heidi came inside with a peculiar question. "Mama, can I go swing on the swing with the man?" Alarmed, Lisa questioned her daughter, who described a man who had introduced himself as Mr. Gordy. Lisa's mind immediately raced to the worst-case scenario, a kidnapper. She told Heidi firmly not to talk to or play with strangers, and immediately called Andy in a panic, instructing him to come home and to keep all the doors locked. The incident sent Andy into a protective rage. He searched the property, but found no trace of anyone. In the following weeks, Heidi continued to mention Mr. Gordy, describing him in detail, a man with grayish, silver hair who always wore a dark suit. He would come by to talk and play with her. The Wyricks questioned their neighbors, but no one recognized the description. Lisa began to wonder if Mr. Gordy was simply an imaginary playmate, a figment of Heidi's active imagination, especially since she often played alone. They humored her, thinking it was harmless, but Heidi's stories persisted. She would set a place for him at the table, though his food remained untouched. One day, Heidi came inside frightened, claiming a man had been at the door. Lisa went to check, but no one was there. Heidi insisted the man wasn't Mr. Gordy and that he had blood on his shirt. Lisa, seeing no one, again attributed it to a made-up story. Lisa felt foolish for even looking for something she believed didn't exist and would simply play along with Heidi's tales. Months passed, and Heidi's connection with Mr. Gordy only deepened. The Wyricks believed he was a creation of her mind, a constant companion she spoke about every day. While Heidi seemed happy, the stories were becoming a daily occurrence. Lisa's sister, Joyce, moved in next door and noticed Heidi talking to someone in the yard. Lisa dismissed it as her imaginary friend, Mr. Gordy. Joyce found the situation unsettling. She learned from a neighbor, Miss Kelly, that the name Mr. Gordy belonged to a real man's James Gordy, a family friend and caretaker who had passed away in 1974. He was described exactly as Heidi had described him. Gray hair and a dark suit. Lisa was unnerved by the coincidence, but refused to believe it was the same man. Driven by doubt, Lisa went to the library to research James Gordy, finding his obituary and records showing he was the caretaker of the property. She took Heidi to the cemetery, and the girl ran unerringly to his grave, despite never having been there before. This provided chilling proof that Heidi's playmate was, in fact, a dead man. Lisa struggled to accept this reality. Her niece, Kelly, witnessed the family dog growling and barking at an empty kitchen, its hackles raised at something unseen. The dog later ran away and never returned. The Weiricks were grappling with the fact that their daughter was interacting with a man who had died a decade before she was born. Their situation grew more terrifying when Heidi pointed out a man in an old photograph lawn. A man who had appeared to her covered in blood. Lisa learned from Miss Kelly that Lon was her uncle, who had died in 1957. The entities were no longer just Mr. Gordy. There were others, unseen and malevolent. Heidi became increasingly frightened. One night, Andy rushed home after Lisa called, terrified to find Heidi with 3 long scratches on her cheek. They spent the night with relatives, shaken. Andy himself later woke up with similar claw marks on his side, burning with pain, confirming that something was physically attacking them. The family felt under siege, vultures gathering in the trees as if waiting for their demise. Desperate, Lisa contacted Dr. William Roll, a psychologist who studied the paranormal. Dr. Roll was intrigued. Heidi described a person she'd never met, and the physical scratches on both her and her father were extremely rare in his experience. He interviewed the family, finding them sane and consistent in their stories. Heidi described the apparitions as solid and real, not ghostly figures. He theorized about place memories, recordings of energy retained in the environment after a person dies. Heidi, he believed, was sensitive to these traces. Dr. Roll performed a test, mixing an old photo of James Gordy with other photos. Heidi identified his picture without hesitation, a man she'd never seen. He investigated the environment, looking for natural causes like magnetic fluctuations or positive ions, and found that Heidi's room had high positive ion counts and that a seismic fault existed near the property, potentially causing hallucinations. While his scientific explanations comforted the family somewhat, the scratches remained a mystery. As the years passed, the haunting continued. A new daughter, Jordan, was born. Heidi grew accustomed to seeing spirits, but was still afraid. Mr. Gordy faded from her life as she entered her teens, but the dark, faceless figure remained, appearing to her aunt and causing family members to become more isolated. The local media became interested, and Heidi was ridiculed at school for her claims. Lisa feared the spirits were attracted to her family, not just the house. Her sister Joyce confirmed this fear when she heard a disembodied child's laughter in her own home. One night, Lisa heard deep, gravelly voices discussing her from above her bed. The family sought the help of their new church, Brother Stephen Shelley, who believed the spirits were demonic. Dr. Roll returned to investigate further after Jordan spoke to a phantom little girl who had died in a car accident. He explored the possibility that the family's psychic sensitivity was a genetic inheritance, tracing paranormal experiences back generations in Lisa's family to a place called Haunted Hollow, the site of a Cherokee Trail of Tears tragedy. He remained convinced it was a natural, not demonic, phenomenon. Frustrated with Dr. Roll's explanations, Lisa turned to a psychic medium. The family left the house for a blind reading. The medium, Amy Allen, described the spirits perfectly, including Mr. Gordy, Lon, and the dark, faceless figure. She concluded that multiple entities inhabited the property, and that Lisa and Heidi's medium abilities attracted them, believing they were benign or troubled, not demonic. Another psychic, brought in by Lisa, confirmed her fears of a demonic presence. The family felt trapped. The family's pastor, Brother Shelley, led a prayer service to anoint the family and cast out the demons, believing they were marked by evil. While the service provided comfort, it didn't stop the attacks. The family reached an impasse. Heidi accepted her ability to see spirits, trying to see it as a gift rather than a curse, though she wished it would all go away. The family continued to live with the fear, relying on their faith to get them through each night. 2. Part 20. The Parker family story. Desperate to be closer to the hospital treating their son Paul for cancer, the Parker family moved into a seemingly perfect house in Connecticut. The rent was surprisingly affordable. For Karen Parker, the house, a huge, older home with a spacious yard, was the answer to her prayers, situated just minutes from the hospital where her 14-year-old son was fighting for his life. Paul had been given only 6 months to live unless aggressive treatment could put his cancer into remission. The grueling daily commute from New York was taking its toll on both Paul and the family. Karen knew she had to make a change, and her husband, Ed, agreed to transfer his job. However, finding a rental for a family of 6 proved nearly impossible until they stumbled upon this property. The house was beautiful, with hardwood floors, a huge kitchen, and ample space for their large family. The realtor even mentioned the possibility of converting the basement into bedrooms for the boys. When they officially rented it, the family was ecstatic. Their only priority was getting Paul close to his doctors. On his first visit, Ed was impressed by the house's size and charm, and Karen showed him the basement, which she hoped could be converted. While exploring the basement, Karen stumbled upon a disturbing find: tools, jars, and a freezer. A closer look revealed the sinister truth. The house had once been a funeral home. Ed tried to calm Karen, insisting that even if it had been a funeral home, the bodies were prepared there, not buried, and that they had no choice but to stay. They agreed to hide the truth from their children, especially Paul, who was already facing his own mortality. But the house's secret couldn't be hidden. As Paul explored his new home, he seemed to sense its grim past. Karen, while mopping the floor, was horrified to see the water turn blood red. A few days later, as she moped again, she saw Paul descend into the basement. He came up pale and shaken, telling her of a voice that called his name and of a presence that made him feel he was being watched. He told his sister Connie the terrible truth. They were living in a former funeral home. His brother Bobby was unnerved by the revelation, but he tried to appear brave for his older brother. Karen took Paul to their priest for a healing prayer. That same day, Bobby and his friend saw a figure in the old morgue, and later heard a deep, grinding voice calling from the freezer. The siblings began seeing apparitions. Karen remained skeptical, attributing the children's fears to their imagination and her son's illness, believing Paul was hallucinating from his medication. Her oncologist, however, confirmed that his treatment would not cause such delusions. Distressed, Karen felt her son might be suffering from a psychological breakdown in addition to his cancer. The children's fear manifested in practical ways. To save money, Ed removed most of the light bulbs in their rooms. That night, Connie ran from her room, claiming the light switch in her sister's room was turning on and off by itself. Karen went to check, and her mother said Connie had been in bed for 2 hours. Karen saw Connie sleeping in her bed, realizing her daughter had been mimicked by something that had taken her form. Paul grew withdrawn, wearing dark clothing and barely speaking. His cancer went into remission, but his behavior continued to worry his family. He seemed angry and possessed by a strange meanness. Karen's niece, Teresa, came to stay and found Paul transformed. He spoke of a demon that visited his bed every night, a man in a suit, telling him to do bad things to his family. Paul's writings were disturbing. He had become obsessed with death and wrote poems about a man in the suit. Teresa saw a dark figure and heard heavy breathing. The family grew terrified of Paul. He began arguing violently with his parents and was eventually taken to the hospital. Before he left, he warned his parents that with him out of the house, the entity would come after them. Karen, home alone with the children, challenged the entity, but saw nothing. She felt an unexplainable fear and cold. Teresa, who had been sleeping in the living room, was violently attacked in her bed. Karen, asleep next to her, was also assaulted, feeling a crushing weight and suffocating presence. Her rosary was ripped from her neck. When Ed came home from work, he had also been attacked by a presence at his office. The family was in complete despair. They called their priest, who told them to forget about it, believing that acknowledging the evil gave it power. Karen found a demonologist, Id and Lorraine Warren, who confirmed their worst fears. The house had a demonic presence, a doorway to hell, and Paul had been the target. They believed a church-sanctioned exorcism was the only answer. The Warrens' team moved in to document the activity, recording evidence of demonic attacks and helping the family survive. They explained the stages of demonic possession, and Karen herself fell into a trance, experiencing the weight of the entity's hopelessness. The researchers themselves were attacked, with beds vibrating and a choking presence trying to isolate individuals. Finally, the Catholic Church granted an exorcism. Father Richard arrived to perform the ritual. During the exorcism, Karen felt herself being lifted off the ground and choked, and objects were thrown around the room. The priest struggled to maintain his faith and ignored the demonic provocations. After the ritual, a profound sense of peace settled over the house. The family felt the evil was gone, replaced by a warm, comforting light. They moved out soon after, not wanting to risk reopening a door that had been closed. Paul was released from the hospital, and his cancer never returned. The family has tried to move forward, burying the trauma of those 9 weeks and leaving the house and the memories behind.